Hey guys, before we begin tonight's story, do me a little favor. Drop a comment below and tell me, what time is it where you are right now? Which city, which room, what kind of night surrounds you? Are the lights off? Is the air still? I read all your stories before bed, and maybe tonight, someone reading the comments will find comfort in knowing they're not the only one awake. And if this story helps you drift off, leave a small light in the comments below. A heart, a word, or just the time now. Dim the lights. Let your breath slow. Let the phone rest gently beside you. And together, let's return to a forgotten time. A quiet room. A flickering candle. A memory not yours, but one that somehow remembers you. A wooden house on a grey London street. The curtains drawn tight. The fire long cold. The air smells of coal dust, boiled starch, and damp wool. The wind scratches faintly at the window panes, as if trying to come in and be heard. Tonight's story is about the women who lived here. Not queens or rebels or names found in books, but those who bore the weight of silence. She rises before the sun, not because she wants to, but because the day has no softness for waiting. The kettle is already rattling, and her fingers move before her thoughts do. She wears the same cotton nightdress from the winter before, patched in places only she would notice. The baby stirs upstairs, but the child is not hers. She is the one who tends, not the one who is. Held, the house creaks the way old houses do, in a rhythm that becomes a kind of companion. She lights the small lamp near the stairwell, its glass chimney blackened from last week's soot outside. The gaslight still burned dim through the mist. Inside, the cold floor waits for stockinged feet. No one sees her begin the day. No one will remember how early it started. But in this hush, before footsteps, before orders, before sharp words, there is a kind of aching peace. She stands at the basin. The water is still. The soap is cracked, and for a moment she sees her face reflected in the bowl. Not clearly, but enough to remind her thought she is still. Here she does not sigh. She does not speak. She simply begins, and the house forgets. Her again. Let me know where this finds you tonight. I always listen. What does the sky look like there? Quiet, clouded. We'll begin with the first flicker of morning and the cold room where warmth is only borrowed, never owned. Morning in this house does not begin with birdsong. It begins with cold, not a biting, theatrical cold, but the quiet kind that seeps into the walls, into the seams of the curtains, into the marrow of the women who move through it. She rises with the chimney smoke, not from rest. There is no rest here, only the pause between tasks. The hearth has long since cooled, and last night's embers sit like grey bones in the grate. She crouches beside them, tucking her knees to her chest, fingers numb as she gathers. What's left of the coal? The scuttle is light, always too light. Coal was meant to be rationed this week. Mr. Alders warned her last Sunday after supper. His voice quiet but firm. Only enough to take the edge off, he had said. As if cold had an edge. As if it did not swallow you whole. She strikes the match with care, cupping it like a fragile secret. For a second there is light, then the flare dims, swallowed by the dark coals. Smoke curls upward like breath held too long. There is no heat yet, just hope pretending to be heat. The girl upstairs stirs, Miss Clarara, 4 years old, and too clever for her own comfort. She would want warm milk. And the story about the rabbit today again. The nursery is no warmer than the kitchen. Thin windows, thicker frost. She rubbed the glass with her sleeve. Trace her name in the steam. A small ritual of claiming space down here. The kettle begins to complain. Not boil, not yet. Just the low growl of water, remembering fire. She sets the table with slow, deliberate care. For plates, 2 cracked. 3 spoons. No one notices what's missing, only what's late. There's porridge in the pot. Not enough sugar. Always not enough sugar. She stirs clockwise. As she always does, because her mother once said, it keeps bad luck from clumping. Her mother had said many things, and none of them were welcome in this house. The kitchen walls are yellowed now, not by design, but by the breath of too many winters. She wipes the windowsill with a damp rag, not because it needs it, but because some part of her craves a clean line, even if only in dust. Behind her, the door, cracks. Mrs. Alders, she doesn't speak right away. She never does, just watches for a moment, as if assessing a painting that's slightly askewed. The girl nods her head. Fire's slow this morning. She says, it is not a complaint, but it will be heard as one. The woman sighs. There's a chill in the floorboards. She mutters and leaves the room without looking back. The girl exhales carefully. Quietly, the porridge bubbles. Upstairs, footsteps, tiny thumping ones. The child is awake. The day is no longer hers. She removes her apron, smoothing the hem with both hands. It is stained. She does not notice anymore. The fire still hasn't caught properly. She leaves it anyway. There is warmth to be found, but not in bricks or in breath. In rhythm, maybe in the comfort of repetition. The kettle finally sighs. Not a whistle, not a call. Just the sound of surrender, and outside, the fog thickens. Let the story speak softly to you tonight. If your room is cold, know that so many have lived in cold before, and still, they lit fires with whatever they had. Upstairs, the nursery window weeps with condensation. Tiny beads race one another down the glass, tracing silent paths toward the sill. The room is grey, touched only by a sliver of reluctant daylight laking through the lace. Curtains, she stands in the middle of it all, half-dressed, half awake, holding her breath as she pulls the corset tight. The laces are worn and uneven. The fabric creaks with age, like floorboards under strain. She loops the cord behind her, pulling once, twice, the second pull sharper, more final dot, each. Breath becomes smaller, not gone, just trimmed. The corset is not cruel, it is simply the shape the world has asked her to take. Below her ribs, the pressure blooms, not painful, not yet, just a feeling of becoming smalerso. The day might fit more easily around her. The cradle beside her creaks. The child stirs again. Miss Clarara kicks off her blanket, frowns in her sleep. A ribbon still tied in her hair from the night before. The girl dreams of candy and marzipan mice, things that never quite arrived. She will wake with questions. She always does. And the woman beside her will answer them, all with stories woven from threadbare patience and half-truths wrapped in calm. She fastens her dress. Buttons climb up, her spine like a ladder she never asked to climb. The collar is stiff with starch. The sleeves cinch at the wrists, where no one sees the red marks left from the kettle's steam. The child stirs again, this time with a little sound, not quite a word, just the beginning of need. She lifts the girl gently, blanket and all, and presses her to her chest. The child sighs into her shoulder. There now, she whispers, rocking without thinking, moving the way old trees move in wind, not resisting, only swaying. The cradle creaks, empty now, but still rocking slightly. She will make warm milk. With the last of the tin, she will cut the bread into perfect halves, though her own stomach turns hollow, and she will tie the same blue ribbon into the same braid, just as she has every morning for the last year. The child is not hers, but the care is she wraps. Miss Clara, in a wool shawland, carries her down the creaking stairs. Each step a prayer, the wood won't betray her weight. Down in the kitchen, the kettle hums again. She stirs the milk gently over the flame, blowing across the top so it won't scald. The girl rests her cheek on her shoulder, small fingers twining into the collar of her dress. Outside, the fog has begun to lift, not much, but enough to make the window glow with silver. She moves to the table, placing the child on her lap, cradling her with one arm, while she lifts the spoon with the other. She feeds her in silence. The warmth from the milk rises like a hush around them. For this brief moment, there is no cold, no lace pinching at her neck, no red knuckles or fraying apron seams, just breath and the steady rhythm of care. She does not speak, but inside her, words form like vapor. I'm still here. I am still warm. I am still. The fire flickers weak, but alive. Outside, someone calls for the baker. A carriage rolls by. The world awakens again. But for now, in this narrow moment of stillness, the cradle is empty, the corset tight, and the room smells of milk and wool. If the weight of your own day feels tight upon the ribs, let this moment loosen it. Breathe into it, just for now. The house is quiet now, but not the kind of quiet that invites rest. This quiet expects something, a polish, a scrub, a shine. She sets the child down near the parlor hearth, a wooden doll placed gently in her lap. Clara hums to herself, a soft, broken tune with no words, the sort children carry between dreams and daylight. The woman turns away. The room is still, but she sees everything. A smudge on the windowsill, a crooked rug edge, ash specks under the coal bucket, lint clinging to the settee like tiny ghosts. She lifts her skirt slightly. Kneeling by the rug, the brush sits beside her, bristles worn thin, handle warm from use. She does not sigh. Sighing wastes breath. The strokes come slow, steady, one direction only, then again from another angle. The dust resists at first, it always does, but then it lifts, into her lungs, into her sleeves. She brushes until the grain of the wood emerges again. The color a little deeper, a little more true. Her knuckles are cracked. The red lines have not healed from yesterday's soap. But this house does not wait for healing. She moves to the mantel next. The clock there ticks too, loud, its hands stiff and stubborn, like the gentleman who insists it chime at noon, though it never truly does. She lifts each item gently, a cracked porcelain dog, a vase with one artificial bloom, a photo frame long emptied. She wipes beneath them all, not to erase, only to prove. She was there, behind her. Clara babbles softly, now making her doll speak in a higher voice. "I'm the queen," the child says, "and you must dance." The woman smiles, just barely, not at the fantasy, but at the resilience of play. Her cloth is already damp with ash and polish. Next, the baseboards, the ones behind the drapes, the places no one sees, but she knows. They're there, and they remember. Kneeling again. She scrubs at a dark stain near the floor. It's been there since Michael coughed blood last autumn. They said it wasn't consumption, but the house remembers otherwise. The stain does not come up. She leans back on her heels, and for a moment, her body begs her to stop. The weight of the corset, the sting of her wrists, the echo of scrubbing too long in silence. But the dust doesn't wait, and the silence demands polish. She wipes her brow with the back of her hand. Sweat and polish smear into a dull shine. A door creaks. Upstairs, footsteps. She rises. Before they reach the stairs, replaces the cloth, hides the cracked polished jar behind the kettle. By the time Mrs. Alders enters, the woman is arranging cushions on the sofa, as if they had always been straight. Mrs. Alders looks once, not quite at her, and nods, not quite approval. Make sure the brass is done before noon, she says, already retreating. The woman nods, but only after the door clicks shut. Clara is now dressing the doll in a sock. The woman kneels once more, returning to the cloth. This time, the brass fireplace grate. It reflects her face, distorted, blurred. Not hers, but enough to remember. She polishes in circles, tiny, deliberate ones, until the brass gives off a faint, unwilling gleam. She will not be thanked, she will not be noticed, but the dust will remember, and that is enough. Outside, a clock chimes 11. Almost noon. She stands slowly, back stiff, hands trembling. She presses her fingers together once, watching. The knuckles turn white. They still work. That's all the house requires. If your hands feel tired today, too much screen, too much holding, let this moment remind you that hands have always borne the weight of invisible labor. The ink bottle is almost dry. She shakes it gently, watching the air bubbles rise like tiny secrets. The pen, a narrow quill with a splintered edge, waits on the wooden desk beside a single sheet of thick paper. The room is still. It is the only room that ever feels like it might listen. She pulls the chair back carefully, so it doesn't creak. The cradle upstairs is still. Clara is napping, her small hand curled beside her cheek, like a fallen petal. The pen scratches once, then silence. She always begins the same way. Dearest, not because there is anyone to read it, but because it anchors her to a softer voice than the one the house gives her. She writes in slow, practiced strokes, not hurried. There is no one to rush her here. The words fall carefully. Dearest, the day was quiet again, but not in the kind way. The kind that presses in too close. I scrubbed the brass today until I saw my own mouth again. I didn't recognize the shape of it. She dips the pen again. The ink makes a tiny noise as it takes hold. That sound has always comforted her. The fire didn't catch until near noon. Clara was cold. I gave her my shawl. No one noticed, but she said thank you. In her way, she brushed my braid before nap. I think she remembers me, even if I'm not hers. The script begins to lean slightly now. She never learned properly, just watched others, and practiced on scraps meant for shopping lists. I wonder, sometimes, if I'd feel more relief. Someone wrote back, just once. Even if the ink ran, even if the page smelled of salt. She pauses, not to think, but to breathe. The corset presses hard today. The whalebone sits tight across her ribs, reminding her with every exhale that she is not built for expansion. Last night I dreamt I was in a field. No fences, I was barefoot, and there were dogs running. One of them stopped and looked at me, and I felt known. ***. I woke up before I could name him. Her fingers tremble slightly. The letters grow smaller. I know this will never be posted. I will fold it and place it behind the dresser, between the floorboards, like the others. Maybe one day, someone will read them. Maybe they'll think I was real. The pen falters. The ink pools slightly. She sighs quietly, then adds below, with tired hands, and a heart still learning not to hope yours. She folds the paper twice, once long ways, once again, soft and neat. She kneels near the floorboard. Under the desk, slides the paper into the thin gap beside the others. A soft whisper of pages resting together. Unread, unspoken, but not lost. The chair creaks as she rises. She presses her palm to the top of the desk for a moment, as if steadying something inside her. From the hallway, a voice calls. Where is the girl? It's Mrs. Alders. The voice is clipped, measured, already, expecting failure. The woman clears her throat gently. Noon tea, ma'am. I'll bring it. She smooths her apron, hides the ink-stained fingertip with her thumb as she leaves the room. She glances once more at the desk. The air still holds the scent of ink and longing. She closes the door. Behind her, if you've ever written, words that no one will read, or whispered thoughts into a dark room just to hear them spoken. You are not alone. The fog rests heavy over the city this afternoon. Like breath held too long, it swallows the rooftops, softens the chimneys, hides the eyes of buildings that usually watch. She walks quickly, shawl drawn tight around her shoulders, skirt hem darkened with river mist. Her boots tap softly on cobblestones, their soles worn thin from too many errands. Each step feels swallowed by the grey. The path to the market leads past the Thames. She doesn't have to take this way, but it is quieter, and the fog makes her less visible. To be invisible is not always sorrow. Sometimes it is peace. The river is wide and still. Its surface looks like poured tin. A barge passes slowly, lantern glowing like a drifting star, and the water doesn't ripple. It only receives. She stops for a moment near the low wall, beneath a black-limbed tree. The bark is slick with dew. The branches arch overhead like ribs. A boy walks past, selling newsprint. His voice is muffled by the fog. Something about a fire in Whitechapel. She doesn't catch the rest. Doesn't want to. The bridge is ahead. She crosses it with her head lowered. Not because she fears, but because the wind whips harder. Here, even the fog seems thinner on the stones. On the other side, a row of black iron fences leads toward the market square. She sees the butcher's sign first, then the baker's door swinging open and closed. But before she steps forward, she pauses beside a shop window. Her reflection is faint, just outline and suggestion. The glass shows a row of gloves on display, neatly arranged. White lace, grey wool, brown leather, each pair more expensive than a week's pay. She places her hand near the glass, not touching, but measuring. Her fingers are thinner than the gloves would allow. The reflection faddices. Someone moves behind the glass. A shop girl, dressed fine, a little rouge on her cheeks, hands clean. The girl looks through her, not at her. Not with cruelty, but with practiced dismissal. The woman lowers her hand, turns away. Inside the market, the warmth is thick with breath and noise. Coal smoke clings to the ceiling beams. Women barter in hushed tones, baskets hooked over their arms, mouths drawn tight. She walks through the rows, eyes on onions, root vegetables, bits of bread wrapped in paper. She holds her coins close. 5 pence and a button. Buttons often become bargaining chips. not valuable, but they show willingness. A storekeeper eyes her up and down, then weighs 2 apples in his palm. He says nothing but the way he places. Then back down says everything. She buys potatoes, small, with dirt still on them, the kind that will need soaking. A woman beside her sneezes, and the sound rings out like a gunshot in the hush. No one moves, no one comments, but eyes narrow. People shift slightly away. She knows this look the city gives when it thinks illness is near, the look that comes before blame. She wraps her basket, tightened, leaves the market quickly. The fog has lifted slightly now, but her steps remain quiet. Measured, she passes a churchyard. The gates are locked, the grass inside, stiff with frost. One bench near the wall holds a small pile of bread crusts, crumbs left by someone who couldn't wait to get home. She sits, only for a moment. The basket rests beside her. The potatoes inside seem heavier now, though she knows they haven't changed. The river behind her moves slow and deep. A bell tolls in the distance, a low, tired sound. She watches the mist fade from the rooftops. Chimneys blink into view. Curtains open like eyes waking up. But no one looks down here. No. One sees the woman sitting quietly with cold hands and a basket full of grey vegetables. She breathes in through her nose, holds it, then exhales, slowly, and rises. The day will not wait for sorrow, and judgment is lighter when carried without words. If the world has ever made you feel seen only in passing, like fog parting briefly around your shoulders, you are not forgotten. The parlor smells faintly of rosewater and coal ash. A lace doily slips on the polished table, its corner browned from a forgotten teacup years ago. The window is open, just a crack, enough to let in the city's breath, but not enough to chill the room. She moves with care. The silver tray rattles ever so slightly as she places it. Down porcelain cups, the sugar bowl, spoons that never stay straight no matter how she aligns them. A plate of dry tea biscuits arranged like fallen dominoes. Mrs. Alders is seated in the corner chair. Her spine is a line of pride. Her gloves are still on pale grey, tight at the wrist. 2 visitors have arrived. Both women, both quiet. Their hats cast soft shadows over their brows, and their eyes move more than their mouths. They are not friends. They are women in orbit, linked by Sunday. Pews and market glances. She pours the tea with practiced quiet. The kettle sings faintly, but the room hums louder with things unsaid. 1 sugar, says the first woman, not looking at her. None, says the second. Already adjusting her saucer, Mrs. Alders nods approval, not to her, but to the room itself. She's very good, she says aloud, referring to the girl without turning toward her. She doesn't speak out of place. The visitors murmur. Their gloved hands fold over their laps like silk petals. One of them reaches for a biscuit, then decides against it. She steps back to the corner, her hands clasped before her, not behind. Behind is defiance, not at her sides. Sides suggest nervousness. Clasped is safest. Clasped means small. The talk begins, not loudly, but with the gentle weight of opinion. Did you hear of Miss Harper's niece? Ruined herself with poetry and letters, I hear. Letters, always letters. They make women forget their place. A spoon stirs sugar. The sound is deliberate. Soft metal against ceramic, circles of judgment drawn in warm tea. They speak of another woman now, a neighbor's daughter who married beneath her, a nurse. they say, as if the word itself were dirty with effort. She breathes, quietly, not too deeply. The corset still holds her in place. The talk shifts to corsets next, a new French style, narrower at the ribs. Feminine, says one. Dangerous, says the other, but she smiles when she says it. Mrs. Alders speaks with pride. My girl fastens hers without assistance, tighter than any I've had. They glance at her. Finally, briefly, she lowers her eyes. Not in shame, in habit. One biscuit is taken, crumbled, left on the saucer. The crumbs fall like dust from a ceiling beam. Someone coughs into a gloved hand. The silence afterward is polite, too. Polite. The girl steps forward to pour more tea. Her hand is steady, though her knuckles are scraped. The spout hisses gently. Steam rises, twisting like soft ribbon into the afternoon light. Pretty wrists, one of the visitors says absently. Shame they always end up ruined in houses like this. The laughter is quiet, but not kind. She smiles faintly, as if agreeing, as if the wrists in question are not her own. She retreats again to the corner. The lace curtain flutters in the breeze, catching a golden mote of dust and spinning it mid-air. The tray is almost empty, the tea nearly cold, the cups stained faintly around the rim, but the words linger longer than the warmth. Outside, the city carries on. Inside, the air is thick with expectation, the kind that drapes over furniture, settles into cracks and curls inside. The folds of a woman's dress. She does not cry. There is no time for softness now. Only the clock ticks honestly. If you have ever stood in a room and felt the weight of eyes that judged instead of saw, if you have ever measured yourself by the silence after someone spoke, then you know this parlor. The house sinks into shadow slowly, as if reluctant to sleep. The gaslight in the hallway flickers with each draft, casting long ribbons of gold and grey across the wooden floor. She sits near the kitchen table, a basket of mending at her feet, a needle already threaded in her hand. The fabric in her lap is a faded bodice, once lilac, now more ash than flower. A seam has come loose beneath the sleeve. The thread must be fine enough to disappear, but strong enough to hold what the world pulls apart. She begins with the hem. Her stitches are small. Even she does not look at her fingers, only at the thread. The gaslight hums softly, a low whisper like breath through teeth. The house above is quiet, but not entirely still. Clara has turned in her cradle twice. She listens for the third, the whimper that might follow, but it doesn't come. Only the sound of her own thread pulling through cloth. She pulled tightened as she. The rhythm is its own comfort. A song for no one. A ritual for tired hands. Her fingers are red at the tips. The pad of her right thumb has a small split, a crack that burns when touched by soap, or lemon juice, or judgment. She keeps stitching. The basket holds more, a stocking with a run, a shirt cuff torn near the buttonhole, a child's mitten missing its match. Each piece speaks softly of those who wore them, but never of her. She does not mend her own things. Tonight, that comes later, if time allows. If the thread holds out, the gaslight sputters once, then settles again. A moth drifts near the flame, its wings making no sound. She watches it hover for a moment, drawn to something that will burn it. Then she looks down again. The hem is nearly done. A knock echoes faintly from upstairs, someone adjusting in sleep. A bed frame sighing beneath weight. She tucks the final stitch into the seam. knots the thread without looking. The thimble slips from her lap, clinks against the wood. She doesn't move to retrieve it right away. Instead, she flexes her fingers, once, twice. The bones pop softly, a reminder that they're still hers. The mended bodice is folded with care. Not pride, not care. It joins a small pile on the chair beside her. She reaches for the stocking next. The needle finds its place again. The thread begins its journey. The rhythm resumes. Outside, the wind speaks in the chimney. Low, long vowels. Old language, the kind no one teaches, but all women come to understand. If your fingers have ever worked late into the night, not for ambition, but for necessity, then you know this silence. You've heard its weight. You've sown beside its breath. Let your hands rest now, even just for a while. The church bells toll once, then again, slow. Deliberate notice set, hang in the air like linen drying in windless rooms. She walks with careful steps, boots cleaned the night before, shawl pinned at the throat just so. The dress is the dark one, the Sunday dress, not because it is fine, but because it has fewer holes than the rest. The path to the church is lined with wet leaves. They cling to the stones like memories, pressed flat and turning to rot. Each one holds a season now lost. The sky is pewter. The air smells of iron and chimney soot. Inside, the church breathes quietly, filled with bodies dressed in hush. Gloves are removed delicately, hymnals opened with reverence, but rarely read. She finds her place near the back, always the same pew, worn at the edges. Its wood polished by countless quiet elbows. She does not kneel right away. She listens. The organ hums softly, warming its voice. The candles flicker in brass sconces along the nave, casting soft shadows on stone wall sand. The faces of saints who never blink. The pews ahead are already filled. Women in veils, men with stiff collars, children too quiet, as if fearing God's attention might settle on their fidgeting. She lowers herself onto the bench, the wood size, beneath her. She clasps her hands loosely in her lap. The minister begins with a reading, a passage about obedience, another about the meek. His voice is firm, not cruel, but shaped by long practice and deep rooms. The congregation nods at the right places, eyes closed, heads bowed. She stares at the floorboards. They creak in the same places every week. She imagines the lives that walk across them, the grieving widow, the silent governess, the wife with bruises she wears beneath her corset, each one praised for her stillness. The sermon turns toward womanhood, virtue, patience, humility, words that hang heavy when spoken from a pulpit. She listens without reaction, even her breath slows. Behind her, a child coughs once, then is quickly hushed. Beside her, the hymnal lies closed. She does not open it. She knows the songs they are stitched into, her hands like old thread. The minister speaks of Mary, of her acceptance, her purity, her silence. No one asks what she feared. No one wonders how often she wept. The bells toll again. The end of service. People rise in soft waves. She remains seated for a moment longer, not in prayer, in stillness, the kind that comes from being seen but never named. When she does rise, her knees crack softly. She straightens her shawl, adjusts the gloves that cover her red hands. Outside, the wind has picked up. The trees shudder gently. Children run ahead on the path. laughing their voices the only unmeasured thing. She walks. Home alone, the church behind her disappears slowly into fog. In her pocket, she carries a single dried rose petalticon from the altar weeks ago. No one noticed, no one asked. It crumbles slightly as she walks, but she doesn't mind. It is a softness no one can take. If you've ever sat quietly and listened while the world told you how to be, if you've been praised for your quiet, but never heard for your ache, then this pew remembers you. The afternoon light is the color of faded parchment. It spills through the window in long, tired stripes, illuminating the nursery in dust and hush. The child is gone for the day, taken to the park with Mrs. Alders and her sister's boys, an outing meant to show good breeding, as if sunshine could polish lineage. The room is quiet, but not empty. She stands in the doorway for a long time, hands resting on the frame. The smell of soap lingers faintly, lavender and starch. The cradle is made up, blanket folded. A small toy rabbit tucked at the edge like a sentry. But it is the chair that draws her. The rocking chair near the window, worn smooth by use, its runners curved like a memory you can't quite place. She crosses the room slowly, each step a conversation with the floorboards. When she reaches the chair, she doesn't sit. Not yet. Instead, she kneels beside it, laying a hand gently on its arm. The wood is cool, still. Her fingers trace the shallow carvings left by time, small scratches, a dent near the back, as if someone once gripped it to harduring a moment too painful to name. She sits. The chair sighs softly beneath her and begins to move back and forth, back and forth. Not quickly, not deliberately, just enough. She doesn't speak. There is no one here to listen, and besides, the words live somewhere behind her ribs, where breath is too short to carry them. This chair once held a baby, not Clara. Another. The one who didn't stay. The one no one names anymore. Not because they forgot, but because remembering makes the silence too loud. She remembers the weight of that child, how small the head had been, how quiet the last breath was. Not with drama, but with exhaustion. She rocks slower now. One hand rests on her lap. The other still clutches the chair arm. Not tightly, but with a tenderness saved for things already gone. She had not been allowed to mourn, not properly. There had been work the next day, sheets to scrub, a floor to polish, Clara's shoes to shine. The cradle had been emptied, dusted, reused, the tiny socks folded and placed in a drawer. Beneath other forgotten things, she breathes in. The air tastes of old wood and soft endings. Outside, someone whistles. A boy, a cheerful tune. Too bright for this room. She does not resent it, but she does not welcome it either. The chair rocks once, more, then slows. She rests her head back, lets her eyes close, just for a moment, just long enough to feel the shape of that absent girl beside her again, like a child returning in a dream. There are tears, but they do not fall. They live just behind the lids, waiting. She will rise again soon. There is bread to slice, Clara's coat to brush, evening tea to prepare. But for now, she sits in the chair, and the chair remembers everything. If there is a space in your life, a chair, a room, a day, where something once lived and no longer does, know that the silence you carry is not invisible. The staircase creaks overhead, each step above her a muted thunder, boots echoing with authority. She does not look up. This space beneath the stairs is hers, not claimed, not gifted, simply taken. In the quiet that others ignore. The walls are low and slanted, painted once in cream, but now stained with years of breath, soot, and steam. The air smells of damp wood and lye. Her small bed is tucked beneath the steepest slope, a cot thin as a prayer, covered by 2 patched woolen blankets and 1 flannel. Scrapped thought smells faintly of someone else's closet. The lantern flickers beside a wooden box that holds everything she owns, not much. A second pair of stockings, a comb with 3 missing teeth, a rosary she doesn't touch often, because faith is hard to hold when hands are never still. Above her, the family dines. Voices drift down like dust, cutlery, light laughter, the clink of porcelain. She chews slowly on a crust of bread taken from the morning loaf, the heel, dry and quiet. Dinner will come later. When it is already cold, she reaches for the wash basin beside her bed. The water is tinged with soap, cloudy and still warm from the last scrubbing. She dips the cloth and presses it to her face. Not scrubbing, just cooling. Her cheeks are pink from the afternoon heat of the stove. Her arms ache from lifting coal. Her knees are bruised from polishing the hearth tiles that no one noticed had been cleaned. She leans back against the wall and listens. The voices above shift. A chair scrapes. Someone calls for the pudding. She closes her eyes and drifts briefly into the memory of velvet. Not hers, never hers, but once. She'd touched the hem of a guest's cloak while folding it. In the entryway, it had been midnight blue. It had smelled of cinnamon and winter. She remembers the way it folded in her hands. Soft and alive. She had imagined wearing it just once, just to feel the weight of something meant to be seen. A sound startles her. The dumbwaiter rattles behind the wall, a plate being lowered. Dinner for her. She rises slowly, fingers stiff from stillness, opens the panel, lifts the tray. A bit of stew, a broken biscuit, a note in the corner, written in Mr. Alders' tight hand. Polish brass railings tomorrow. Guests Friday. No greeting, no name. She places the tray beside her cot, eats without ceremony. There is no need for performance here. This space does not ask for posture. It asks only that she be useful and quiet. After the meal, she folds her apron across her lap, then removes her shoes. The left one has a hole near the toe. She will try to stitch it later, but there is no thread thick enough for leather. The lantern dims. She trims the wick, and for a moment, the room grows dark. Then light again, but smaller. She lies, back on the cot, knees curled slightly, hands over her stomach. The ceiling above her is just a board. Beyond that, footsteps, voices, a world that calls her the girl, but never asks her name. Sleep does not come quickly. It waits behind the hum of duty, behind the memory of velvet, behind the soreness in her arms. But it comes, eventually. Soft, quiet, and beneath the staircase. If you've ever felt the walls pressing close, if you've ever been called useful but never seen, if you've carved your own small space scene, a world that offers none, then this room remembers you. Morning arrives with dull insistence. No golden light, no breeze to carry promise. Just grey, pressed flat against the windows, pooled in the corners of the rooms. She wakes before the house, not because she wishes to, but because silence has become her alarm. There is bread to slice, boots to clean, a kettle to fill, though the coals haven't caught properly in 2 days. But today, the silence follows her. It lingers on the stairwell, wraps around the banister like fog. It watches her scrub, fold, peel potatoes with the dull knife she hides under the counter. She doesn't hum, not today. She always used to, a thread of melody, soft and shapeless. Something between a hymn and a lullaby. She never knew where the tune came from, only that it helped her. Hands forget they ached. She would hum while sweeping, while darning socks, while brushing Clara's hair before supper. It was never loud, just enough to mark the time passing. But not today. Today her throat feels full of dust. The notes will not rise. It had started yesterday. A word from Mrs. Aldar, sharp, dismissive, asterisk, you hum like a milkmaid. This is a house, not a barn. She hadn't responded, had nodded, then returned to her mending, though her fingers had trembled slightly, and when she reached for the tune again later, it had vanished. She had searched for it behind her breath, between the quiet clatter of dishes, but it wouldn't come today. There is only the scrape of the knife, the hiss of water on hot metal, the rustle of starching linens. She peels an apple. Its skin falls in a long ribbon. Curling on the table like a question mark, Clara skips through the hallway. The girl is singing a nursery rhyme, high-pitched and off-key. She spins once, clutching her wooden rabbit, then disappears up the stairs. The house does not scold her children, or allowed their music. She watches the staircase long after the child is gone. Peeler paused mid-dash, slice dot. She wants to sing again. She wants the sound to lift from her chest like steam, from the kettle, soft, rising, harmless. But it does something inside her stays. Locked, the parlor clock ticks. She wipes her hands on her apron, stares at the apple pieces, then picks one up and places it gently in her mouth. It's cold, not sweet. She'll choose slowly from outside. A street organ plays, faint through the open pane, a tinkling tune about love, played on cracked Bellisby, a man whose name she does not know. She listens, not with longing, just with memory. The music passes, wheels squeaking beneath it, until the notes vanish into another street, and the house falls quiet again. She does not try to sing. She places the knife down and returns to the basket of laundry by the door. There are sleeves to press, buttons to mend. A waist seam torn too tightly along its stitch. She sits, thread in hand, breath, steady, no tune, just the work. If you've ever had music inside usilenced by someone else's word, if you want sangand, no longer do, know that the melody still waits. Even now, the room was colder than the rest of the house. The door closed quickly behind her, as if the air inside had been holding its breath and exhaled, at last, the moment she stepped in. She did not flinch. She had done this before. The windows were covered in thick drapes, pulled shut sometime during the night. They let in no light, only the memory of it, a faint outline around the edges, like the hem of morning. The bed sat in the middle of the room, high, dark wood, carved roses along the frame, and on it Mrs. Hargrave, still wrapped in linen, her arms crossed at the waist, her mouth softened slightly, as if she'd been trying to speak, even as her breath left her. The doctor had come hours ago, confirmed what everyone already knew. The undertaker was late. Snow had fallen in the square, and the wheels of the cart could not turn fast through the sludge. So it was the girl's task to wait and prepare. The gloves were folded on the small table beside the bed. White kid leather, too fine for her hands. stiff at the wrist. They smelled of cedar and lilac, a draw scent, preserved for Sunday death. She picked them up gently, turned them in her palms, then slid one over the cold fingers of the body. The skin was firm, not yet stiff, just delayed, as if still deciding whether to truly let go. She worked slowly, thumb first, then the rest, one hand, then the other. She smoothed the cuffs, making sure they lay flat against the bone. The ring had been removed earlier. It sat in a dish on the dresser. The doctor had taken it off, and no one had asked who would wear it next. She adjusted the lace collar, tucked the edge beneath the chin, ran a damp cloth along the cheek bonesto, removed the last of the dust. Mrs. Hargrave had not been kind, but she had once handed the girl a handkerchief during a cough, the only time she'd been touched without instruction. That memory stayed. She folded the linen back over the body's legs, tucked the edges under with care, not reverence, but respect. The clock ticked behind her. A long case, the kind that always sounded like waiting. She stepped back. The gloves looked too white, too loud. She dimmed the lantern there. Better the snow outside had stopped. The stillness pressed close to the windows. She sat for a while. Not close, just near enough that the silence had company. And when the undertaker finally arrived, he knocked once, didn't look her in the eye. He stepped in with his assistant, both of them wrapped in dark wool and formality. She moved aside, watched as they lifted the body onto the stretcher. The sheet covered the gloves, but she knew they were there as they carried her out. She noticed something. A lock of hair had slipped. From beneath the linen, she reached gently, tucked it back. One last act of small, unspoken service. The men nodded as they passed. Neither said thank you. She didn't expect them to. She returned to the wash basin in the hallway, rinsed the cloth with warm water, scrubbed her hands with lemon soap until they stung, then dried them on her apron outside. The cartwheels turned, slow and steady. The house resumed its rhythm. Another teacup, CLINKED. Another footstep fell, and the gloves remained behind, wrapped around fingers that would never hold again. If you have ever carried out quiet kindness for someone who could never repay you, if you've made peace without witness, offered care without return, then your hands have known something sacred. The ache began in her side 3 nights ago, a dull, pulsing knot beneath the ribs, not sharp, not screaming, just steady, like a second heartbeat that didn't belong at first. She ignored it, pushed through the morning scrub, the noonday firewood. The slicing and starching and sewing and scrubbing fit came without pause, but now, in the pantry, as she reaches for the flour tin, a sharper pain folds her slightly inward. Her hand presses low against her waist, fingers digging through fabric as if they might find an answer beneath bone. She straightens slowly, wincing. No one sees. That matters. She cannot afford pain. Mrs. Alders believes illness is moral failure. She says things like, if a girl eats properly and keeps a clean mind, she'll keep a clean body. The girl knows better, but she nods, as always. She finishes the bread. It is tough, uneven. She slices around the hard part. No one will comment, but they will notice. Her hands tremble slightly. By the time she lights the oven, a bead of sweat clings to her temple, despite the cold morning. She leans on the counter for a breath. Just a moment, just enough. Later that afternoon, Mrs. Alders sends her out with a note to the doctor. Take this to Dr. Ascombe. It's about the baby's cough. She nods, pulls on her shawl. and leaves before her knees can fail her again. The street air is bitter, even the fog stings today. She walks quickly, basket in hand, eyes low. Dr. Ashcombe's building is near the square. A neat brick office with a brass plate on the door inside. It smells of ink and shemph and silence. The assistant takes the knot and nods her toward the wall bench. She sits, careful not to lean too far left. The ache deepens when she does. She waits not long. Doctors don't delay. 4 girls in aprons. Is this for the Alders child? He asks as she steps in. His voice is clipped, his cuffs spotless. Yes, sir. She hands him the note. He reads it. Makes a small noise in his throat. She need rest, vapor rub, and warm milk. He begins to write, then pauses. He looks at her, really looks for the first time. You're pale, she swallows, folds her hands, nods once, working hard. Yes, sir. Any pain? She hesitates then. No, sir. He narrows his eyes. She looks at the floorboards, tries not to sway. The light overhead flickers slightly, and the air feels tighter than before. He finishes the note. You're too thin, he says. Eat more bread. She nods, bites her lip, holds still. He hands her the paper. No further words. She thanks him, leaves the room without showing the lymph that now begins in her hip. Outside, the fog has thickened. The world smells of soot and snow. She stops by the baker's window, watches warm rolls, being lined in rose golden, steaming, safe. She doesn't go in. The coins in her apron are not hers. She returns home, steps through the back door, places the note on the side table, then sits on the kitchen stool, just for a moment, just long enough to feel the ache turn again. She won't tell anyone, not yet. Pain. For girls like her must be swallowed quietly. If you've ever felt something grow inside you that no one else could see, if you've ever hidden pain beneath a polite smile, you are not weak, you are surviving. It is evening now, late enough that the city hum has quieted, but not so late that the world has disappeared. The liminal hour when the sky turns a color no name fits, and silence feels less like peace and more like something left behind. She sits in the laundry room, not because there's laundry that was finished before supper, but because it is the only room where no one comes. A single candle flickers on the wooden shelf, melting slowly beside a folded bar of soap. Its flame bends each time she moves. As if startled, she sits on the stool, hands in her lap, listening to nothing, or rather to the one sound that remains, her own breathing, in, then out, shallow, but even measured, not from peace, but from habit. She watches her fingers flex, the joints crack, just barely. The skin along her knuckles is rough, stained faintly with the greyish mark of lie. No bandage, no only breath. She leans forward slightly. The stool creaks, not loudly, but enough to remind her that even stillness has weight. The room holds the scent of boiled linen and ash. Warm. Once, but now fading. She closes her eyes in this room. She does not have to smile, or nod, or carry trays, or thank someone for letting her be invisible in this room. There are no eyes watching to see if she finishes her portion, or irons the collar evenly, or speaks only when spoken to. There is only the hush, and her breath, in, then out. Her shoulders drop, just slightly. It is the first time all day they have done So she remembers something suddenly. A game her brother used to play when they were still children. Before he died of the fever, he would sit beside her at night, holding his breath, challenging her to see who could go longer without making a sound. They always ended in laughter. Red-faced, teary-eyed. Now, she is always winning. She opens her eyes. The candle has burned lower. Its wax pools near the base, ready to spill. The ache in her side has dulled to a pulse. Not gone, never gone, but manageable. Her breath is all she hears. In then out. In then out. No clock ticks in this room. No voices, no footsteps, only the thrum of being small, tired, present. She reaches into her apron, pocket hand pulls out a button, not hers, torn from one of Mr. Alders' coats. She turns it in her palm, small, browned, ordinary. She doesn't know why she brought it. Perhaps for the feel of it, or perhaps because even forgotten things deserve to be held. She closes her hand. Around it, presses her knuckles to her chest, and breathes. If you have ever sat in a room, not to rest, but simply to exist. If you have ever listened to your own breath and wondered if anyone else in the world was breathing alongside you in that same moment, then this silence is yours too. The house at the end of the lane stood like a book left open too long, its spine cracked, its pages softened by time and weather. No one knocked on its door anymore. The curtains stayed drawn, and the chimney smoke rose faintly. Only on Sundays, inside lived 3 sisters, unmarried, Rav, uninvited time. Passed over them like dust settles on a forgotten table. She knew them not by name, but by rhythm. They sent for washing once a week, always wrapped in linen, with a note pinned in handwriting that slanted downward as though the weight of the years had dragged it slowly to the right. She was sent one afternoon to return a parcel of clean dresses, wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. Mrs. Alders had said, "They'll pay in coin or silence. Take both and don't linger." The path was overgrown. Hydrangeas bloomed too late, and their petals hung like old lace left out in the rain. She knocked gently. After a moment, the door creaked open, not wide, just enough to reveal a pale eye, then a soft voice. "Leave it just inside, dear." She stepped in. The air was heavy with lavender oil and boiled potatoes. Faint traces of mildew clung to the corners. Though the floor was clean, the front room held 3 chairs, all facing the same window. In each sat a woman, one with a cane across her knees, one with spectacles resting unused in her lap, one with a length of blue thread trailing from her sleeve, as though she'd been mending something and then simply stopped. They didn't look up. They stared out the window, though the curtain was drawn. She placed the parcel gently on the sideboard, cleared her throat softly. "You're washing, ma'am." The eldest sister, or perhaps just the tallest, turned her head slightly. "Thank you, child," she said. Not unkind, just tired. A coin sat on the table beside her. She gestured to it with one knotted hand. The girl took it, bowed her head, then turned to leave, but something made her pause. The silence was too complete, not hollow, but brimming. She looked once more at the 3 of them. Their dresses were tidy, their hair was pinned, but everything about them felt like waiting, as if time had stopped ticking. But no one had told them. "Do you?" she began, then stopped. None of them moved. She tried again. "Do you ever go out?" A long pause. Then the one with the spectacles smiled. though her eyes didn't quite lift. "We did once," she said softly. "Many times, to dances, to picnics, to Sunday walks in Hyde Park." The other nodded, barely. "But things came," the tallest said. Double quotes. "Obligations, illness, mourning. And men who forgot to write," the one with the thread added. They all fell silent again. Then, as if on cue, each turned slightly toward the window, still drawn, still hiding the day. She stepped back, hands clenched around the coin. It felt heavy. "Thank you," she said again, though she wasn't sure who she was thanking. Outside, the sky had gone silver. The path was softer beneath her boots. Behind her, the house closed gently. No slam, just retreat. She walked slowly back. Something about the silence of that house stayed with her. Not as something tragic, but as something unfinished. 3 sisters, 3 windows, 3 chairs, and a lifetime of dresses, pressed, smooth, and never worn out. If you have ever known someone who waited longer than they hoped, who chose the quiet path not because it was noble, but because no one else was walking it, then you've met these daughters. It was nearly midnight when she returned to the pantry. The house had settled, floorboards no longer groaning. The hearth's glow reduced to a sigh of amber coals. The children slept. The master's door had not opened since supper, and Mrs. Alders' voice had faded behind her own chamber door. Muffled by the weight of evening silence, she lit a stub of candle, shielding the flame as it caught. The pantry shelves loomed tall, lined with tins, jars, and folded linens. But in the far corner, behind the sack of oats and the crate of broken crockery, sat a small wooden box. It looked like something discarded, but inside, it held her truest voice. She pulled the lid back slowly. Within it, wrapped in cloth, was a bound book, thin, hand-sewn, its cover stained with age and oil. A diary, not the romantic kind filled with pressed flowers and musings on love. No, this was something else, a place for survival, a ledger of self. She untied the cloth, opened to the next blank page, set the stub of a pencil between her fingers short, chewed slightly. A relic stolen from an old school drawer. She paused, listened once more. Stillness, then she began. March 17th. I saw a magpie today. Just one. It landed on the fence beside the basin while I was hanging laundry. I gave it a name, Clemency. It watched me fold a nightshirt and tilted its head as if to ask why I bothered. She wrote slowly. Her penmanship was uneven, slanted, as if unsure it deserved the space it took. The pain in my side is worse. I told no one. I whispered to the spoon while stirring the stew. It didn't answer, but it listened. She smiled faintly. The diary was not for remembering. It was for proving that she had thought, that she had noticed, that she had been. She turned the page. The entries stretched back a year. Some were smudged, written in a hurry between chores. One page had a pressed leaf taped to it. Another bore the faint outline of a tear she had not meant to shed. She read a line from weeks ago. They laughed in the parlor, and I imagined throwing my apron on the table, walking out with the thunder of my own footsteps. But I stayed. I always stay. She closed the book slowly. The ink had bled through onto the apron beneath her apron. The same she wore while stirring, while scouring, while not being seen. She touched the stain. It would not come out. She would have to hide it tomorrow. But tonight, it was beautiful. She returned the diary to its cloth, wrapped it tightly, and slid it back into the box. Then pushed the box beneath the shelf until only darkness remembered where it lived. The candle flickered, nearly gone. She watched it lean, then pinched the wick gently between her fingers. Darkness returned, but it felt softer now, not empty, only resting. If you have ever written down a thought simply to prove you were here, if you've spoken to pages Beckers, the world wouldn't listen, then your words, too, are sacred. The girl wasn't a nurse by title. There had been no certificate, no paper signed with ink and approval, but the work had found her anyway. It always does, when the illness came, the kind that crept slowly through the lungs, then bloomed like rot in the chest. She was the one they sent for, not the doctor, not the lady of the house, not the priest. Her, because her hands were steady, and she did not flinch at the color of blood, the smell of soaked linen, and because she didn't ask questions. It had begun with Mr. Alders' cousin, come to visit and never left. He fell ill on a Thursday. By Friday, his sheets were red with coughing. She was told to sleep beside the door in case he called out in the night. He did twice then. Never again on Saturday. She wiped his brow with vinegar water, changed the cloth every hour, held the cup to his lips. Even when he refused it, she whispered nothing. No comfort, no prayer, only try. On Sunday he wept, not from pain, from fear, and still she said, only try. Number 2. One else entered the room. They praised her distance, her lack of visible emotion, not squeamish. Mrs. Alders had said, strong constitution, we made the right choice. As if strength were the same as silence, as if not crying meant not caring. She had cared more than she should have, because she knew the shape of loneliness in a sick bed, because she had once watched her own mother fold into the pillow and never unfold, because the body on the mattress was not just a patient, it was someone who would vanish without a mark unless she remembered him. So she did, even now. Weeks later, she remembers the shape of his hands, the way his voice cracked when he asked for water, the tiny mole near his ear, the last sound he made, a sigh, like a curtain falling shut. When he died, they took the body away quickly, burned the sheets, boiled the bed frame. They never once asked if she was all right. They asked if she'd bleached the floorboards. She had, that night. She went to the laundry room, closed the door, pressed her forehead to the cool stone wall, and waited. For what? She wasn't sure. A tear, a sob, even a single gasp of grief. But nothing came. Her body had learned not to cry, not because she didn't feel, but because there was never tomato finish. Something needed stirring, or scrubbing, or fixing. She was not allowed to stop, so the sadness stayed inside, quiet as a bruise beneath a sleeve. The next morning, the Alders had guests. She was asked to serve biscuits and cordial in the parlor. Someone joked about catching the Alders' house cough. Laughter followed. She smiled, nodded, placed a glass down gently, and said nothing. Later, she scrubbed the teacups until the porcelain screamed beneath her cloth. If you have ever held someone through their ending, and then been expected to sweep the floor, if your heart broke in silence, Bess, others called your stillness strength. You are not alone. Grief doesn't need noise to be real. The market was already full by the time she arrived. Not loud, not yet, but full in that quiet, pressing way thought places become when everyone is hungry and, no one wants to speak it aloud. The street was still wet from the night's rain. Puddles pooled in the cracks between stones, and her boots sank slightly into the muck with each careful step. She kept her apron folded over her skirt, a basket clutched close to her chest. The list in her pocket was small, not ink, but pencil, faded and smudged from the morning's dish. Water.turnips.bread. Ends. Awful. If there was any left. The stalls curved round the square like tired teeth. A few shouted their wares, mostly the younger boys, with mouths that hadn't yet learned the weight of silence, but most just stared. Let the cold do their selling. The smell was a bitter stew, wet cabbage, raw meat, earth and blood, everything honest and unkind. She passed a butcher's stand first. A pig's head stared back at her, its mouth slightly open, as though still trying to speak. She averted her eyes. A woman beside her bartered for marrow bones. 5 pence for 2, but the butcher said 7. The woman didn't argue. She opened her purse slowly, like it hurt. Next came the bread stall. She waited behind an older man with a cane that shook with every step. When he reached the front, he simply asked, "What's left?" They handed him a sack of crusts. He nodded once, paid, and turned away, not looking at anyone. When it was her turn, she placed 2 coins on the wooden counter. "Ends, please," she whispered. The baker's wife handed her a half loaf, still warm in the center. No words passed between them. The price was in the silence. She clutched it tight, so tight the crust cracked slightly in her hand. Down the row, a fishmonger was packing away a tray of sprats. The smell was thick. Salt and rot mingled with brine and shame. No fish today, too costly. She turned toward the back stalls where the poorer vendors lingered, offering vegetables with dirt still clinging, dunned cuts of meat that needed boiling before they stopped bleeding. She found the turnips, small, soft, spotted, but edible. The seller looked her over once, said nothing, held out a hand. She gave the rest of her coins. He counted them slowly, then handed her to turnips and a bent carrot. It was more than she expected, less than she needed. As she turned to leave, she passed the stall with the cloth scraps, ribbons, thread, torn laced. She stopped, not to buy, just to look. There was a piece of blue fabric frayed at the edges, but smooth to the touch. She touched it once with 2 fingers. The girl behind the table glanced up. "Would suit you," she said, not smiling. The girl nodded once, then stepped back. She couldn't afford beauty today. The rain began again as she left. The market light, like mist, enough to blur her view, but not enough to wash anything clean. The basket was heavier now, but not full. She walked quickly through the alleys, past the hollowed eyes of boarded windows and the rustle of rats beneath crates. When she reached the servant's door, her apron was wet through. Her hands were red, and her back ached from carrying champagne like any other good. She placed the basket down on the kitchen table, pulled the loaf from its wrap, set the turnips aside to boil later. The carrot she held in her hand for a long time. Its orange skin looked almost joyful against the grey light of the pantry. She thought of the girl at the ribbon stall, the scrap of blue dot, then placed the carrot in the pot and said nothing. If you've ever bartered more than money for the right to eat, if you've ever left a place with full hands and an emptier heart, this market remembers you. The drawing room was considered the finest in the house. The wallpaper, once soft rose, had faded into something the color of regret. The carpet, floral and thick, still held the ghost of spilled tea and perfume. The lace drapes hung heavily on the windows, never tied back, never stirred by breeze. But what it did not have, what she noticed most each time. she stepped through the doorway was a single book. Not one, there were shelves. Yes, dark wood, finely carved, lined with porcelain ornaments, framed portraits of people long since buried. But the space where volumes might have rested spines cracked. Paige's thumb was taken instead by silence. She stood quietly beside the hearth, waiting for Mrs. Alders to finish her letter. The mistress was seated at the escritoire, a fine quill, between two gloved fingers, writing to a cousin about the weather in Bath. The girl kept her eyes low, but her mind drifted. She imagined the room with books, what it might feel like to have shelves lined with voices, whole worlds, stacked and waiting pages she could disappear into when the air turned to thick with judgment. She had only read once. Years ago, a discarded copy of Jane Eyre, found in a laundry basket behind a rector's house. She had hidden it for months beneath a loose floorboard, wrapped in linen, reading by stolen lamplight, whispering each word into her fingers, though afraid the wind might hear and take it away. She hadn't understood all of it, but she remembered this. The sound of languon folding inside her like breath. Mrs. Alders folded her letter neatly, dried the ink with a square of sandpaper, and gestured without looking. Fires low, the girl stepped forward. Knelt, she took the poker, prodded the coals with care. The embers sighed, ash shifted. A spark leaped, but died before it reached the hearthstone. When she rose, her apron was dusted in grey. She did not brush it off. Behind her, the mistress began humming a hymn, a tune that looped on itself, like ivy climbing a wall with no end. The girl turned to go, but she paused near the shelves again. A row of ceramic birds sat where poetry might have been. Their painted eyes gleamed without seeing. She wondered, did the lady ever want to read? Did she once hold a book as a child, before tea parties and appearances took its place? Did she forget, or was she never taught? The girl left the room without asking. Back in the pantry, she sat for a moment on the low stool. Her fingers touched a pocket of her apron. Empty. The diary was elsewhere, but the longing was the same, to read, to write, to know the names of things beyond. What the house allowed, a room with no books was, a room that asked for nothing, and silence, when given too long, becomes a kind of furniture. If you have ever stood in a space where your thoughts had no place to bloom, if your questions once shrank to fit someone else's quiet, then this room, too, knows your name. It stood in the hallway, taller than her by half, its wooden face carved with leaves that curled like smoke. The long case clock, the house's spine. Every room heard it, even behind closed doors, even in the attic, each hour. It sang a low, solemn chimathat, never rushed, never softened. The girl passed it a dozen times each day, with linens in her arms, with trays balanced on sore wrists, with scalded fingers and swollen feet. And always, the clock ticked. Not for her. She had tried to wind it once, weeks ago, when Mrs. Alders had forgotten just once, and the pendulum slowed, its tick becoming a stutter. She'd waited until night, the hallway dark, her breath shallow. She'd opened the panel, touched the brass key. It was colder than she expected, heavier, too. She had only just begun to turn it when Mr. Alders' voice had echoed down the stairwell. "What are you doing?" Not shouted. Not angry, just enough. She had stepped back, apologize. Don, single quote, to explain. "It's not your place to set time," he'd said, his voice already vanishing into his study. Since then, she had never touched the key again, but every time she passed the clock, she watched. watched how it owned the hallway, how its sound-marked mensch would never control it, chimed for others, for tea, for guests, for the hour to change the candles. Her hours belonged to tasks, to when the floor must be scrubbed, when Clara's nap ended, when the bread would rise, not by her measure, only by the needs of others. This afternoon, she paused by the clock, a tray of spoons in one hand, her shadow spilled long across the wooden floor, distorted by the narrow window at her back. The clock ticked. Unbothered, she stared at the glass face. It reflected her faintly. Not clear, just enough to remember she was there. The minute hand moved. She waited, then moved on. In the laundry room, later, she found the small wristwatch taken from the pocket of a coat meant for mending. A guest had left it. They never returned. It no longer worked. The hands were frozen at 6:42. Still, she kept it tucked behind the flour sack. Sometimes, she held it to her ear, imagined the tick, imagined time that belonged only to her. What would she do with it? Not leave, not scream, just rest. Stretch in the sun, take tea before the chime, read the same page twice, wind the hour as she pleased. But the real clock, in the hallway, never stopped. Not for her, it belonged to those who had rooms with names on the doors. She had none. Only moments borrowed between the ticks. If you've ever moved through a life measured by someone else's bell, if your time has never quite felt like your own, know this. You are not running behind, you are not late. The chime was never meant to serve your name. The wash basin sat in the corner of the pantry, cracked slightly along the rim, but still whole. Still holding water, she filled it from the kettle, carefully, slowly, steam rising in soft curls, wrapping around her fingers like forgotten breath. She knelt before it, rolled up her sleeves, reached for the cloth she always used, frayed at the edge, but soft from use. She dipped it in, wringed it out, then paused. The water stilled. Her face looked back at her, not clearly, not like a mirror, but in watery suggestion. A blur of features, eyes, eyes, a pale oval that trembled with every movement in the surface. She leaned closer, tried to find herself, but what she saw didn't match memory. The lines beside her mouth, the shadow beneath her eyes, the slope of her shoulders, so much narrower than she remembered, as if they'd been drawn inward by years of carrying. What could not be named? She touched her cheek. It left no ripple in the basin. This wasn't the face from her childhood, not the girl who used to chase chickens behind the orchard, laughing, barefoot, with dirt beneath her fingernail-sound hair that wouldn't hold a ribbon. This face was quieter, still, not empty, just set aside, like a book waiting to be reopened after someone else finishes living. She wiped her cheek with the wet cloth, not harshly, just enough to feel it. The skin was warm, alive, still here, she thought. Of all the times she had stood behind a mistress, fastening brooches, adjusting combs, the way those women had looked into mirrors if they owned their reflections, as if they expected beauty to obey them. She had never looked like that, not because she wasn't beautiful, but because she'd never been taught to search for herself, only to serve, to clean, to quiet. A small drip echoed into the basin. Another that the water was cooling now. She leaned back, sat on the stool beside the shelf, the cloth in her lap, and for a long time she just stared, not at the basin anymore, but at her hands. They were red, knotted at the knuckles, fingernails short and rimmed with flour, but they were hers. They had stitched and stirred and held. They had turned pages in secret. They had touched the forehead of the dying. They had lifted a child in darkness without. Waking her, they were beautiful. She closed her eyes. Let the basin go. Still again, let the steam fade into memory. If you've ever looked at your reflection and wondered where you went, if your face has felt like something borrowed, worn by duty, then let this water hold. You are still there. Beneath the noise, beneath the years, you are not lost. It was a small patch of earth behind the house, barely more than a courtyard, boxed in by crumbling brick wall sand, the tall shadows of neighboring buildings. No one came here anymore. Not since the eldest. Alders' child fell a laughter playing barefoot in the mud. Mrs. Alders blamed the soil, too old to damp. Let the weeds take it. And so they had. She stepped through the creaking back door, hands still damp from washing up. The apron around her waist was stained with carrot tops and a splash of stew she hadn't seen coming. She didn't plan to come outside, but something in the air tonight had pulled her. The wind was low, carrying the scent of iron and moss. Even the sky, though grey, looked less heavy. She walked slowly to the edge of the garden. No path, just flattened grass, patches of nettle, and one old stone bench that leaned to the right. She remembered when she first arrived. This garden had seemed like a possibility, a place she might tend, plant something, beans, maybe. A corner of lavender, she'd asked once. Just once. Mrs. Alders had narrowed her eyes. Flowers are for women with nothing better to do. So the garden grew wild, unloved, half-dash shaded, and stubborn. She knelt down now, near the wall where the bricks had begun to crumble. Her fingers brushed the damp soil. It was cold, soft. She dug slightly with her hand, just enough to find the darker dirt beneath. It smelled of sleep. She sat back on her heels, and for a moment just breathed. Somewhere to her right, a vine had climbed the edge of the wall, not a flowered one, just green and reaching. She touched one of the leaves. It felt real, sturdy. A thought passed through her, not quite a memory, not quite a wish. If she had planted something, what would it have been? Not roses, too proud. Maybe marigolds, or thyme, or a single pale lily that would open in the moonlight hand, ask nothing in return. She leaned back against the wall. The stone was cold, but welcome, a grounding dot in the window above. The kitchen light still glowed. The others would expect her inside soon, but here, for now, she sat in a garden that did not ask for her labor, just her presence, and that was rare. No blossoms, no petals, but still life. She bent forward and pressed a fingertip into the patch of earth she'd stirred, then rose. She didn't look back, didn't expect anything to grow, but somewhere in her chest, a seed stirred. If you've ever tended a space that didn't bloom the way you hoped, if your care was quiet and your hope refused to be loud, this garden knows you, and sometimes green still comes. The first drop was so soft, she thought she imagined it, a gentle tap in the stillness, like the beginning of a lullaby, a tear slipping from a face unseen. She was in the scullery when it came. Late, the house asleep, the storm long promised. Finally arriving with no ceremony, another drop. Then two more. Then silence again. She stepped into the hallway, lantern in hand, and listened. The rain came through the roof in the back corridor first. A slow, insistent pattern, a rush, but a betrayal. She hurried up the stairs, careful not to wake Clarara, and turned into the servants' attic rooms. there a dark patch on the ceiling. Growing dot, she set the lantern down and fetched a pot from under her cot. Then another from beneath the cupboard, basin, bucket, tin, bowl. She placed them with precision, mapping the drips, each drop a metronome of duty. Plink-tot, plink-tot, plink-tot. She didn't panic. There was no time for panic, only movement. The roof had always been fickle. The tiles loosened each winter, and no one ever quite repaired them right, she once overheard Mr. Alders say. No sense fixing what holds for now. Now had run out. She pulled a wool blanket from her cot and tucked it beneath the worst leak. Docked the fabric darkened. Quickly, she didn't stop. One drip landed on her sleeve, another down the back of her neck. She shivered, but kept placing pots. Each vessel caught water like a memory's maw. Sudden, uninvited, she stood for a moment in the center of the room, eyes on the sagging ceiling, and then she remembered the nursery. She ran upstairs. Clara slept with her thumb curled beneath her chin, the wallpaper near her. Crib shimmered with wet. She didn't cry, she didn't even stir. The girl reached. Above her felt. The drip hand placed a pitcher on the floor beside the cradle, then wrapped the child in a second blanket, tucking her close. Outside, the storm had deepened. Thunder whispered from beyond the chimneys. Wind moaned across the eaves like someone trying to remember a song. She stood at the window, watching the rain blur the street lamps. Everything outside looked softer, less certain in her chest. Something ached, not from the storm, not from the cold, but from the weight of always. Catching what no one else noticed falling, the pots dripped behind her. A soft percussion. She did not cry. She only breathed, wiped her hands on her apron, and lit another lantern. The house would wake in a few hours. Breakfast would be expected. Clothes laid out, boots polished. They would not speak of the rain, but the pots would still be their silent witnesses. If you've ever held the leaking roof of someone else's world with hands too small for the burden, if you've stayed awake just to keep someone else dry, you are seen, then the night knows your name. The room was meant for guests, but there were no guests anymore. Not since the winter cough had taken Mr. Alders' mother and left the parlor draped in more quiet than fabric. Still, the room was dusted weekly, lamps checked, sheets changed, as if memory itself could arrive uninvited. Needing tea, she was sent in to air the space, a task she liked more than she admitted. No one watched her in here. No one expected her to be brisk. The wallpaper was faded gold, patterned with trailing vines and closed buds. No blossoms, only promise. She opened the window slightly, letting in the scent of morning fog and horses. The city was slow today, its noise softened by the weight of dampness. As she turned to begin folding the blankets, her eye caught on the wall beside the fireplace. One of the vines on the wallpaper seemed to bend differently from the others. Not wrong dash, just ... Curious. She stepped closer, traced it with a fingertip. It curved downward where the others climbed, its leaves sharper, tucked against the steamers, though holding something secret. She leaned closer, her breath brushed the wall, and she whispered, "I see you." Not aloud, not truly, just enough for the thought to form in the air. It wasn't the first time. Lately, she'd begun speaking to things that couldn't speak back. The wallpaper, the ironing board, a spoon with a dent in its neck. Not because she expected answers, but because no one else asked questions. She sat on the edge of the bed, one hand still on the wall. "Do you miss the ones who used to sit here?" she murmured. Did anyone ever tell you thank you for being beautiful? The room didn't reply, but something in it felt warmer. The wallpaper had always seemed to listen. She had memories like this soft, quiet thing she kept tucked inside, of faces in the stone tile, of floorboards that seemed to hum when she sang under her breath. It wasn't madness. Not to her, it was survival. The world was loud with orders, with instruction, with the expectations of those who never knew her name. But the walls, they held her whispers like a chapel holds candlelight. She stood again, finished folding the blanket, straightened the pillow, brushed the dust from the mantle. Before she left, she paused once more, let her palm rest against the vine. "Thank you," she whispered again, this time out loud, and walked out, closing the door behind her without a sound. If your thoughts have ever strayed into corners no one else believed in, if you've whispered to the ordinary boughs no one else could hear you, you are not alone. Even the wallpaper remembers. She opened the drawer slowly. It creaked like a hinge, remembering sorrow. Inside, wrapped in a fold of cloth meant once for a christening gown, was the last candle, short, stout, its base stained with wax from a flame long since gone. The others had burned down days ago, used to light stairwells, to chase out drafts, to finish stitching hymns when the sun gave up too early. This one she had saved, not out of need, out of reverence. She held it in her hand now, feeling the slight weight of it. Not much, but enough to remind her that it was real. The wick had never been lit. Still white, still perfect. She struck a match, watched the spark flare, and then drew it close to the candle. The wick caught slowly, not all at once. It curled inward, then bloomed a quiet light, soft, steady. She placed it on the floor beside her cot. The rest of the attic sat in hush. The candle illuminated only what it could reach: the corner of her pillow, the hem of her apron, the edge of her diary box beneath. The floorboard, beyond that darkness, not cruel, just complete. She sat down beside the flame, cross-legged, back against the wall. Grief had no date, no anniversary to mark, no name to call, but it had stayed. She felt it in the way. Her breath slowed when the house quieted, in the ache between her shoulder blades. She remembered what never arrived: letters, visits, hands that once held hers, gone, not all at once, not with noise, but with the quiet, wet of people forgetting to remember. She watched the flame. It flickered once, as if nodding. She didn't cry, not tonight. She had rationed tears, the way she rationed sugar. A little, only when necessary. Grief was not always loud. Sometimes it sat beside you, silent and patient, asking for nothing except permission to exist. And tonight, she gave it space. The candle burned lower. Its wax slid down in soft rivers, pooling in a dish she had shaped from an old tin lid. The light shifted across her palms. She lifted her hands, watching the shadows dance across her fingertips, alive, still hers. She thought about blowing the candle out, saving it, but something in her said no, not yet, tonight. She would keep it company until it finished its small, flickering life, and when it went, when the wick finally whispered into smoke, she would sit in the dark, knowing that the light had not been wasted. It had been seen. If you have ever held a quiet flaming, a room full of shadows, if you have loved something too small to last but too precious to discard, then this candle is for you, and it remembers how long you stayed. They told her not to wear gloves. Wasteful, said Mrs. Alders. You can't feel the grime with gloves on. You won't scrub properly. So she, didn, single quotes, T. Every morning, her hands began the day bare. Naked against the cold pump handle. The copper pail, the tin washboard that scraped stories into her palms. She began with the linens. Boil, beat, rinse. Lie, soap, hard as bone. The water turned grey with other people's lives' blood. Tears. Dust from parlor skirts and stains no one admitted to. She did not flinch, only folded her fingers. Tighter around the scrub brush, worked in circles, pressed down until the soap. FOAMED. Until her wrists ached from repetition. Bleach came next, a chipped bottle kept beneath the sink, its neck crusted with old drips. She poured slowly. The scent rose like a ghost, sharp, clean, final. The fumes burned her throat, but she inhaled anyway. It made her feel still, like time had paused, just long enough for her to remember that she was doing something important. Bleach meant something was being erased. The floorboards, the pillowcase, a stranger's shame, her own exhaustion. The skin on her fingers cracked near the nails. Little red slivers like threads coming undone. At night, she would soak them in cool water, wrap them in cloth, then fall asleep before they could heal. When she touched bread the next morning, the crust scraped the wounds open again. No one noticed, but the scent lingered. Her fingers smelled of bleach Yvonne when she held Clara's curls, even when she touched lace, even when she brushed her cheek in the dark, trying to remember softness. Sometimes she dreamed that her hands were someone else's, delicate, powdered, with rings that shone in candlelight instead of calluses that caught on the bedsheets. But dreams do not lift stains. They do not wash floors. So she rose again, scrubbed again, bleached again, and her hands grew stronger. Not harder, just more certain. She once read, long ago, that the body remembers every touch. If that is true, then her hands remembered everything: the warmth of TEAC-ups, the weight of the dead, the roughness of coal, the curve of a child's forehead in fever, and bleach, always bleach. If your work has left traces on your body cracks, where love used to be, scars hidden in plain sight, your hands have been tools and temples both, then know this: you have not labored in vain, and someone, somewhere, can still smell the truth of you in the air. They told her not to wear gloves. Wasteful, said Mrs. Alders. You can't feel the grime with gloves on. You won't scrub properly. So she, didn, single quotes, T. Every morning, her hands began the day bare. Naked against the cold pump handle. The copper pail, the tin washboard that scraped stories into her palms. She began with the linens. Boil, beat, rinse. Lie, soap, hard as bone. The water turned grey with other people's lives' blood. Tears. Dust from parlor skirts and stains no one admitted to. She did not flinch, only folded her fingers. Tighter around the scrub brush, worked in circles, pressed down until the soap. FOAMED. Until her wrists ached from repetition. Bleach came next, a chipped bottle kept beneath the sink, its neck crusted with old drips. She poured slowly. The scent rose like a ghost, sharp, clean, final. The fumes burned her throat, but she inhaled anyway. It made her feel still, like time had paused, just long enough for her to remember that she was doing something important. Bleach meant something was being erased. The floorboards, the pillowcase, a stranger's shame, her own exhaustion. The skin on her fingers cracked near the nails. Little red slivers like threads coming undone. At night, she would soak them in cool water, wrap them in cloth, then fall asleep before they could heal. When she touched bread the next morning, the crust scraped the wounds open again. No one noticed, but the scent lingered. Her fingers smelled of bleach van when she held Clara's curls, even when she touched lace, even when she brushed her cheek in the dark, trying to remember softness. Sometimes she dreamed her hands were someone else's, delicate, powdered, with rings that shone in candlelit instead of calluses that caught on the bedsheets. But dreams do not lift stains. They do not wash floors. So she rose again, scrubbed again, bleached again, and her hands grew stronger, not harder, just more certain. She once read, long ago, that the body remembers every touch. If that is true, then her hands remembered everything. The warmth of tech-ups, the weight of the dead, the roughness of cold, the curve of a child's forehead in fever, and bleach. Always. Bleach. If your work has left traces on your body cracks where love used to be, scars hidden in plain sight, your hands have been tools and temples both, then know this, you have not labored in vain, and someone, somewhere, can still smell the truth of you in the air. The windows across the street never opened fully. They stayed half-drawn just enough to suggest civility, but never enough to risk knowing what lay beyond. The girl noticed them often, on her way to the grocer, while shaking out rugs from the parlor window, when passing by with Clara wrapped in a wool shawl. Each window framed a curtain, each curtain framed a shadow, and behind each shadow, a neighbor, not cruel, not kind, just watching. She would feel it, the subtle weight of their gaze pressing down like dust soft, but everywhere. They never said anything to her, not when she carried home broken bread, not when she spilled milk on the stoop. Not when she limped in winter with a frostbit toe. She dared not bandage, but she heard them all the same, in the way. Mrs. Greaves blinked slowly when she passed with a basket of washing. In the tight smile Mr. Loring offered Edwin, she paused at the corner and dared breathe. They didn't have to speak to speak. They had opinions, sharp, folded neatly between teacups and floral handkerchiefs. They spoke them to each other in drawing rooms, with better light and upholstery that had never seen ash. She walks like her shoes don't fit. She keeps her eyes low. Why? Do you think she reads? She looks like the sort that reads. They measured her hem, her silence, the smell of soap that followed her like breath, and she never responded, because to speak would be to confirm so. She kept her voice tucked deep beneath her apron strings, alongside her patience, her diary, and the dreams that no longer had full shapes. One morning, while delivering folded linens to a house 2 doors down, she saw a little boy press his face to the glass. He stared at her, not with scorn, just curiosity. She smiled, just a little, lifted her hand in greeting. His mother pulled him back by the shoulder before he could wave. The curtain closed. Later that night, as she swept the back steps, she looked up toward their window. It was open, just slightly, and on the sill, a single white sock flapped gently in the breezer child's, small and soft. She smiled again, this time for herself. The neighbors never said anything, but sometimes silence held shape. Sometimes it pointed its chin, and sometimes it bowed its head. If you've ever been watched more than known, if you've lived beneath the eyes of other shoe, chose judgment over welcome, then remember. Their silence is not your measure. Your worth is not a window. It hung at the back of the wardrobe, wrapped in muslin, tied with a ribbon gone brittle with age. No one spoke of it, not anymore, but the girl knew it was there. Everyone in the house did. Even Clara had asked once, in a whisper, "Why does Grandmama keep a dress she never wears?" No one answered her. One afternoon, while dusting the upstairs corridor, the girl passed the guest bedroom, the one rarely used, except by moths and memory. The door had been left open, just a sliver. Inside, a shaft of light fell across the wardrobes handle. She hesitated. Her hands smelled faintly of lemon polish. Her apron was flecked with lint. Outside, the laundry flapped. Unbothered by the secrets of old cloth, she pushed the door open slowly. Inside the wardrobe, beneath wool coats and faded shawls, hung the dress. Ivory once, now pale gold, deepening toward yellow at the hem, lace sleeves, silk buttons, a high neck that whispered of propriety, of unshed breath. She reached for the muslin wrap, untied it gently. The fabric crinkled, as though remembering hands that once trembled. The dress unfurled like a sigh, soft still, but not lifeless. She stared at it, not in awe, not envy, only recognition. She had heard the stories. Mrs. Alders was married in the spring of '66. A fine affair, bluebells in her bouquet, a veil that reached the church steps, and a groom with eyes like steel and silence. They said he loved her at first, but love fades when it is treated like upholstery or something to match the drapes and sit quietly beneath the weight of duty. She had heard the whispers in the laundry room, the arguments, the letters burned before being sent, the sound of a door closing and never opening again. The dress had not been worn since that day, but it remained, not as a keepsake but as evidence. The girl ran her fingers along the collar. It was stiff with time. She imagined Mrs. Alders standing before the mirror, decades younger, fingers nervous on the buttons, eyes wide with belief. Then she folded the dress gently, re-wrapped the muslin, tied the ribbon again, left it where it had always waited. As she stepped out, she caught her reflection in the glass, not in a dress, not in silk, but in her own skin, strong, cracked, but hers. Love, she thought, should not be stored like this, should not yellow quietly while no one speaks its name. If you've ever known a love that looked beautiful to others, but faded quietly in the dark, if you've ever folded hope and tucked it away so no one would ask, know this. Your silence is not surrender. Some dresses are meant to be worn, others remembered. The cradle stood near the window, its rockers still, not because someone had hushed it, but because there had been no sound to begin with. She had been called in. Quietly, a whisper between parlor and kitchen. "The baby's come," the cook had said, wiping her hands on her apron. Early, upstairs. No celebration, no lace, no soft congratulations wrapped in tea and laughter. Just a nod, a glance, a silence already forming around a name not yet given. The girl climbed the stairs slowly, basket in hand, hot water, clean linen, a cloth to wrap whatever had arrived too soon. The air outside the room was cold. Despite the hearth burning inside, Mrs. Alders sat upright in bed, her mouth thin, her eyes somewhere else. Beside her, the midwife stood still, hands folded, on the bed a bundle, wrapped neatly, perfectly. too small. The girl knew before they said anything. She had seen enough of life to recognize when it failed to bloom. There was no cry, no curl of a fist, no searching mouth, red with arrival, only the quiet and the weight of what would never be. She approached, slowly. The bundle barely stirred the covers. The midwife nodded once, wordless, permission granted. The girl lifted the child gently, cupping the head in her palm. It was warm still, so recent, so unfinished. The lips were parted, as if ready to wail, but the breath had never come. She cradled the body, not as a servant, not as a stranger, but as someone who had once before held a child who did not stay. There are no instructions for what to do with a life that does not arrive. Only instinct, only ritual. She rocked just once, just enough to honor the motion the child never learned. Mrs. Alders did not look at her. She stared at the window, where a single line of frost traced the sill like a letter left unwritten. The midwife whispered something about burial cloth, something about quiet arrangements. The girl did not respond. She was looking into the child's face, not with grief, not with fear, with witness, the kind that asks nothing except to be present. She wrapped the child tighter, tucked the edge of the blanket beneath the chin, pressed a kiss oft without sound to the crown of the tiny head, then laid the child back down. No one spoke, even after she left the room. The hush followed her down the stairs, into the pantry, into the roots of her own breath. That night, she dreamt not of crying, but of a lullaby with no words, a cradle swinging gently in a windless room. If you have ever held something or someone who never had the chance to speak, if you have loved through silence and mourned without permission, then this cradle remembers. You had sat in the corner of the drawing room, tucked beneath the window where the light poured softest in the morning, catching the brass keyhole just so like an eye that watched, but never spoke. The writing desk, Mrs. Alders' mother had used it once, a woman of stiff collars and stiffer secrets. They said she wrote letters every week to a cousin in Bath, though no one remembered replies ever arriving. Now, it was always locked. No one touched it, not even the maids, not even her. Still, she dusted it. Every Thursday, a ritual, the same cloth, worn smooth in one corner from tracing that top edge again and again. But today, something was different. The lock was turned open. She had arrived early to the room, arms full of laundry for pressing, and found the lid slightly ajar, like a mouth about to speak after years of holding breath. No one was near, no voices downstairs, no feet on the steps. She looked, once, twice, then gently lifted the lid. The desk smelled of dried ink and old perfume, of cedar and paper, of time that had sat too long in silence. Inside, a stack of letters, a bottle of ink cracked at the rim, a pen with a feathered nib and a leather bound. Journal. She touched the cover, cool, smooth, the initials on the spine worn down to a soft, indecipherable whisper. She opened it. The handwriting was elegant, looped and firm, not hesitant, but tired. She turned a page, then another. I miss the sound of my name spoken without obligation. Some days I write letters I do not send, because my thoughts do not belong in anyone else's house. To be a woman in this world is to become your own archivist, to record without being read, to write without being remembered. She froze. It was not Mrs. Alders' writing, nor her mother's. It was the hand of someone long forgotten, but profoundly alive in the shape of every line. Page after page of thoughts never voiced, questions never asked aloud, loves never written, with names, poems, dreams, memories of girls in green fields, of a river that once carried a letter, downstream a letter no one ever found. She sat down, right there, beside the desk, on the floor, the sunlight warming one knee, and she read. Not all of it, just enough to know that someone once had felt the same ache, had also dreamed with their hands, had also folded their life into Morgan's best. There was no room in the center. When she finally closed the book, her heart felt louder, not braver, just ... Known, she tucked the journal back where it had, waited, arranged the ink bottle, closed the lid, turned the key. By the time the others came into the room, she was gone, but the silence had changed. The desk, no longer just wood and brass, now whispered of stories still living. If you've ever hidden the truest parts of yourself in a place no one else noticed, if your thoughts live between pages, never turn to know this. They are not lost. You are not unread. The hearth was cold again, not quiet cold, a stillness that sank deeper than silence, seeping into the floorboards, the chair legs, the edge of her apron where it brushed the soot. She knelt before it with the same practiced courage she used each morning, cleared the grate, lifted the iron tongs, gathered the remnants of yesterday's fire. Ashes, so many ashes. They fell in soft puffs, as she scooped them grey and fine, like breath that had forgotten how to warm. The logs had burned down completely, no embers left, only shape and memory. She paused for a moment, staring into the heart of the fireplace. It looked like a mouth, open and exhausted. The fire had served its purpose. It had heated soup, dried socks, warmed hands that would never thank it, and now it waited for another flame, another match, another morning of service. Just like her, she lifted the shovel carefully, tipped the ashes into the pale dot, each motion slow, as though rushing might scatter what remained. Her fingers itched from the dust. Some of it clung to her skin, her sleeves, her throat, the chalky scent of spent warmth. She remembered the first time she'd been told to tend the fire. She was 11, too small to carry the coal scuttle properly. She'd tripped on the stone. Heart hand spilled soot across the rug. No one had helped her, but she'd learned how to feed flame without letting it bite, how to keep the room warm without letting her face betray the smoke in her lungs. Now, she was part of the fire, not the flame, the fuel, burned to keep others comfortable, burned until the warmth was noticed but the burning was not. She pressed her fingers to her temples, closed her eyes. How many years had she poured her sulfinto rooms that never held her name? How many times had she watched heat vanish while the cold remained? The ashes didn't answer. They never did. She stood, slowly, brushed her apron, lifted the pail. The fire would be RELIT. As always, another day, another match. She would gather the kindling, strike the flint, feed the flame, and disappear in the warmth without ever stepping into it. If your life has ever been measured by what you gave and not what you were, if you've burned brightly to be swept away with the ashes, know this: you were the fire, not the smoke. And even cold hearths remember the ones who kept them alive. The house exhaled once it slept. No footsteps, no clatter, no voices calling her name with tasks in their mouth. Just the still breath of walls at rest. And above them all, the moon. It hung in the sky like a forgotten promise, low and pale. spilling silver light through the narrow attic window where the curtain had been pinned back with a clothes peg. She sat on her cot in her shift, bare feet pulled beneath her like a child listening to stories. The blanket wrapped over her shoulders smelled of starch and candle smoke, and still she looked up. The moon was full tonight. It made the room glow softly, turning her coarse hands delicate in shadow. She had never spoken much by day, but night made her braver. She leaned toward the window, whispered, "There. You are. Not like a prayer, not like a greeting, like a friend she saw only after everyone else went home." "I made it through another," she said quietly, her words brushing against the glassware. Her breath left a small fog. The moon did not reply, but it never interrupted either. It had seen her in every shape sweating by the stove, scrubbing on her knees, tucking a blanket beneath Clara's chin. It had caught her tears once, months ago, when the pain in her side had flared so sharply she couldn't hold her breath long enough to stifle a cry. No one had heard her, but the moon had watched. She tilted her face to the light. It felt cool, gentler than fire, but more constant. "I don't know if I'm becoming quieter or just smaller," she said, then laughed, softly, almost startled by the sound. She reached for her tin cup of water, sipped slowly. The moon lit the rim, and for a moment, the ordinary became holy. "I wrote again today," she confessed. "Not much, just a line. About a girl who ran into a field and didn't stop running." She paused. She didn't go anywhere in particular. She just ran because no one told her not to. The moon moved a little. Not much, just enough to shift the shadows on her floor. She traced them with her toe. "Do you ever get tired of listening to everyone?" she asked. The silence felt warm now, not heavy, just full. She often wondered if the moon carried everything that the world never made room for: grief, love never spoken, names forgotten, and the soft thoughts of girls who had no one else to tell them. Too, she pressed her forehead to the window. "I don't need much," she whispered, "just to know someone's still watching." Then she lay back on her cot, pulled the blanket over her chest, closed her eyes. The moon remained. Its light spilled over the floor, the edge of her bed, the diary beneath the plank. It listened, as it always had, without judgment, without end. If you've ever spoken into the dark, not expecting an answer, but hoping to feel less alone, if you've ever let the moon hold your thoughts no one else could, then you are not foolish. You are luminous. They sat beneath the bed, where the light barely reached a pair of chasseurs. Tired they no longer held their shape. Leather cracked, laces frayed, the stitching at the heel split, just enough to let water in when the streets turned to mud. She reached for them slowly, her knees creaking like the floorboards as she bent, lifted one shoe, then the other, turned them over in her lap like something sacred, like something that remembered her better than most. She had worn them for nearly 4 years, bought second-hand from a market stall where the vendor said, "Try them quick before someone else does." They hadn't fit properly at first, too narrow across the toes. The left one rubbed her ankle raw, but she learned to walk gently in them. She softened them with oil, stuffed them with cloth at night, stitched them in secret when the soles gave out. Each mark on the leather was a mile of her life. The scuff from slipping in the alleyway, carrying firewood, the white stain from the lye she spilled in the washhouse, thread of wax that had dripped when she carried too many candles at once. These shoes had known every corridor of the house, every stair, every corner where breath had been held. She held them now, fingers brushing the toe. The soles had worn so she could feel her thumb through the bottom. She'd been given a new pair last week, a gift. They said, a gesture of appreciation, black, shiny, unceriaceed. But they were stiff, unfamiliar. They clicked too loudly in the hall. They did not bend with her footsteps. They were shoes made for being seen, not for being lived in. These, though this pair in her lap, they knew her gait. They moved when she moved, slowed when she hesitated, stepped softer when the night was too quiet. She ran a hand down the inside of one heel, found the patch she had, sewn from Clara's old stocking, a secret repair, a kindness she'd done for herself when no one else would. Her chest ached, not from grief, from recognition. There were few things in this world that had stayed with her, fewer still that carried her weight without question. She wrapped the shoes in an old cloth, tied the ends gently, placed the bundle beneath the bed again, not discarded, not forgotten, just resting. If you have ever walked years in silence, if you've worn yourself then so others could move freely, if your journey has lived in the souls of things no one else noticed, then you are not worn out. You are well traveled. The churchyard sat at the edge of the city, beyond the market road, past the bramble-choked fence, where the air smelled of lichen and last rites. She had walked there once a year, in secret, not for worship, not for ceremony, but to remember, to bear witness to the stone. Rusted bore the names of those who were allowed to be remembered. She never brought flowers, only her breath and her silence. The path curled beneath her boots, wet, with morning drizzle. Moss lined the edges of the graves. Like soft decay, some names had faded, worn down by time and wind, but most still stared back at her with practiced dignity. She knew them, not the people, but the patterns, the way beloved wife always came first, the way men's names took up more space, the way dates told nothing of the days in between. She paused before a new plot, fresh earth, no stone yet placed. A wooden marker stood in its stead, tilted slightly. No name, just a number. She'd heard about the burial. A woman from the laundry house fell sick. No family, no one to pay for engraving. She looked down at the soil. It was quiet, but not still. The ground was soft. The worms knew. She whispered, so low even the wind had to lean in to hear. I remember you. Then she turned toward the far row, where the Alders were buried. 5 stones, tall, polished, one with gilded script. She had cleaned them herself. Every spring washed away bird droppings, brushed off the lichen, polished the brass lantern hook. But her own people, the ones like her, had no stones here. No corner of this garden said her name. If she died tomorrow, she would be wrapped in a borrowed shroud, lowered quietly. Her plot marked only by a number and a register line, inked in someone else's hand. She thought about that often, not with fear, with clarity, because names could be taken, but memory made its own path. She knelt near an old tree, its roots curling over a nameless grave, dug a small hole with her fingers, not deep, just enough. From her coat pocket, she drew a smooth stone, grey dot, unremarkable, except that on its underside, scratched in with the tip of a sewing needle, was her name. Not full dot, just the name she called herself. No one was listening. She buried it there, covered it with moss, stood and walked back, homeous. The church bell tolled for a funeral she would never attend. If your life has post without title, without inheritance, without a place carved in stone, know this. The earth remembers the weight of your steps. The wind remembers your breath. And some stories, even without marble, never die. The clock struck, but no one heard it. Downstairs, the kettle whistled faintly on the back burner, steam curling into the empty air like a question no one answered. The linens were folded, the firewood stacked, the boots near the door, aligned in pairs hands that no longer warmed them. She was gone, not with ceremony, not with urgency. One morning the maid didn't arrive for her duties. By noon, Mrs. Alders asked if anyone had seen her. By dusk, the back stairs lay untouched, and no one had made the tea. Her room was silent, the bed still made, neatly as if she had meant to return. On the cot, a folded shawl, a tin cup half full, a note with no ink, just the pressure of pen carved into the page. It read, "The house will breathe without me, but I do not know if it will remember." They looked for her, briefly checked the garden, asked the butcher, waited a few days, then quietly hired another girl, younger, quieter. No mention of her in the books, no record kept, just a cupboard with one less apron, a fire left unlit, and footsteps that never creaked the floor again. But the house remembered in its own way. In winter, the stove sometimes refused to light on the first strike. In spring, a box of pressed flowers was found beneath a stairboard in the back hall. In summer, the new made sorish smelled lemon polish at midnight, though no one had cleaned. The kettle whistled on dust, gathered again in cornish once reached without complaint, and in the attic, a diary remained unread, unburned. Unburned, URIED. If you have ever felt that your absence might not even ruffle the fabric of the world, if you fear being forgotten, be the walls you served, the people you helped, the names you spoke softly but who never asked for yours, then know this. You were not invisible. You were the thread, the breath in the silence, the fire that made the house a home. And somewhere, even now, the story still holds your shape. The story has folded itself shut now, like a blanket drawn up beneath the chin, like a lamp turned low at the window. She is gone, but not vanished, just resting where memory waits, in the threads of old aprons, in the hush between footsteps, in the worn edge of a diary no one opened. And you are still here, still breathing, still held. Let this stillness hold you now, not with sorrow, but with honor. Let the hush settle on your chest, like dust on old books, like moonlight on the floorboards of a room no one uses anymore, but that still remembers every word ever whispered within it. If this story followed you into sleep, then may it leave something gentle behind, a whisper, a warmth, a memory that wasn't yours, but somehow still fits. Let me know, softly, where this story found you tonight, what the sky looked like, what time the silence arrived. Leave a word, a name, a heart. The house may not remember her name, but tonight you did. And now, close your eyes. You are safe, you are home, and the story will wait for you, always, beneath the hush of the next quiet moon.